A blizzard trapped them at midnight, a desperate woman fleeing forced marriage and a lonely widowed cowboy. She was freezing, penniless, with nowhere to go. He needed a wife to fill his empty ranch. They had one choice: marry a stranger before dawn or face the storm alone. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The snow was falling harder than Jake Morrison had seen in 20 years, and the December wind cut through his coat like a sharp knife. He pulled his hat down lower and walked faster toward the train station in Cedar Creek. His boots crunched on the frozen ground as he checked his pocket watch. Almost midnight. He was supposed to meet someone from the mail-order bride agency, but with this weather he doubted anyone would come. Jake was 35 years old and had been alone for 3 years since his wife Sarah died giving birth to their stillborn son. The ranch felt empty without her laughter, and the silence at dinner made him eat standing at the kitchen counter just to avoid sitting at their table alone. His neighbors had been pushing him to find someone new, and finally, loneliness had driven him to write to the matrimonial agency in Chicago. The train station was nearly empty except for old Pete behind the ticket counter, who was reading a newspaper by lamplight. The last train from Chicago should have arrived 2 hours ago, but the storm had delayed everything. Jake was about to give up and head home when he heard Pete call out, "Jake, there's someone here looking for you." Jake turned around and saw a young woman sitting on a wooden bench in the corner. She was shivering violently, wrapped in a thin shawl that was completely inadequate for the brutal winter weather. Her lips were blue with cold and her dark hair was damp from melted snow. She looked up at him with the biggest, most frightened brown eyes he had ever seen. "Are you Mr. Morrison?" she asked, her voice shaking from cold and nervousness. "Yes, ma'am. And you must be Miss." Jake realized he didn't even know her full name. The agency had only told him to expect Miss Claire from Chicago. "Claire Henley," she said, trying to stand up but swaying slightly from exhaustion and cold. "I'm sorry I'm so late. The train was delayed for hours and I've been waiting here since 10 o'clock. Jake quickly took off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Good Lord, woman, you're frozen solid. Why didn't Pete here give you some coffee or let you sit by the stove?" Pete looked up from his newspaper sheepishly. She didn't ask for nothing. Just sat there quiet as a mouse. Jake felt a surge of protectiveness for this small, shivering woman. Well, she's asking now. Get her some hot coffee and make it strong. As Pete busied himself with the coffee, Jake sat down beside Claire on the bench. Up close, he could see that she was probably in her early 20s, with delicate features and skin so pale it was almost translucent. Her dress was well made but worn, and he noticed she was carrying only one small carpet bag. "Miss Henley, are you all right? You look like you haven't eaten in days." Claire accepted the steaming cup of coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around it for warmth. "I'm fine, Mr. Morrison. Just tired from the journey. And please call me Claire." But Jake could see she wasn't fine. There were dark circles under her eyes, and when she lifted the coffee cup, her hands shook with more than just cold. Something had driven this woman to travel alone in winter to marry a complete stranger, and he suspected it wasn't just adventure. "Claire, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me. Are you running from something? Or someone?" Claire's eyes filled with tears but she blinked them back quickly. "I suppose you have a right to know since we're supposed to be married." She took a shaky breath. "My father died 6 months ago leaving debts. The man he owed money to said I could work off the debt by marrying his son. His son is not a good man. I had to leave Chicago." Jake felt his jaw tighten with anger. "So you came here to escape one forced marriage by entering another?" "This is different," Claire said quickly. "I chose this. I wrote to you myself. And if you decide you don't want to marry me after all, I'll understand. I can find work somewhere, maybe as a seamstress or—" "In this weather? In this town?" Jake shook his head. "Claire, the nearest big town is 50 miles away, and the snow's already 3 feet deep on the roads. You'd freeze to death before morning." The reality of her situation hit them both at the same time. She was stranded here with no money, no family, and nowhere else to go. And he was a lonely widower who had already made arrangements for a wedding that was supposed to happen tonight. Pete cleared his throat from behind the counter. "Excuse me, folks, but Judge Thompson is still awake over at his house. I saw his light on when I came to work. If you're planning on getting married tonight, you'd better do it soon. This storm's getting worse and he won't be going anywhere tomorrow." Jake looked at Claire carefully. "What do you want to do? We can wait until tomorrow, talk more, get to know each other a little. Or—" He paused, hardly believing what he was about to suggest. "Or we can walk over to the judge's house right now and get married before midnight like we planned." Claire stared at him for a long moment. You would marry me? Just like that? Even though you know I'm running from trouble? Claire, I wrote to that agency because I need a wife. My ranch needs a woman's touch and I'm tired of being alone. You need a safe place and someone to protect you. Maybe that's not the most romantic reason to get married, but it's honest. What if we don't love each other? Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking of his first wife. Love can grow if there's kindness and respect. My Sarah and I started as friends. The love came later, but it was real and strong. Maybe we can build something like that. Claire looked down at her hands, still wrapped around the warm coffee cup. When she looked up again, there was determination in her eyes. Then let's go see Judge Thompson. The walk to the judge's house took 10 minutes through the howling wind and snow. Jake kept his arm around Claire, practically carrying her through the deeper drifts. She was so small and light, he worried the wind might blow her away. Judge Thompson was indeed awake, sitting by his fireplace in his nightgown and robe. Jake Morrison. What brings you out in weather like this? Judge, I need you to marry me and Miss Henley here. Tonight. Judge Thompson looked at them both carefully, taking in Claire's exhausted appearance and Jake's protective stance beside her. Well, I suppose if you're both sure about this. Do you have witnesses? Pete had followed them through the snow, probably more for the entertainment than anything else. I'll witness, he said, stomping snow off his boots. Mrs. Thompson appeared from the kitchen, drawn by the voices. When she saw Claire shivering despite Jake's coat, her motherly instincts kicked in immediately. You poor dear. Come here by the fire and warm up. She bustled Claire over to the fireplace and wrapped another blanket around her shoulders. Harold, make this quick. This girl needs hot food and a warm bed. The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. Jake and Claire stood before Judge Thompson, still wearing their traveling clothes, with snow melting in puddles at their feet. When the judge asked if they took each other as husband and wife, their I-do's were quiet but firm. Jake didn't have a ring, so he slipped his father's signet ring onto Claire's finger. It was too big, but she curled her fingers to keep it from falling off. You may kiss the bride, Judge Thompson announced. Jake looked at Claire questioningly and she nodded slightly. He leaned down and kissed her gently on the lips. Her mouth was warm despite the cold, and for just a moment he felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in 3 years. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Thompson said warmly. Now let's get you both home before you freeze to death. The ride back to Jake's ranch took nearly an hour in his wagon. He had wrapped Claire in every blanket he could find, and she huddled against his side as he drove through the storm. By the time they reached the farmhouse, she was barely conscious from exhaustion and cold. Jake carried her inside and straight to the kitchen, where he stoked the fire in the stove and put on water for tea. The house was cold and felt unlived in, which he supposed it was. He had been going through the motions of living without really being alive. Claire sat at the kitchen table, still wrapped in blankets, looking around at her new home. It was clean but stark, with none of the little touches that made a house feel warm. No curtains at the windows, no flowers or decorations, just the basic furniture a man needed to survive. It's not much, Jake said, suddenly embarrassed by how empty everything looked. Sarah had it all fixed up nice, but after she died I just couldn't. It's perfect, Claire said softly. It's safe and warm, and that's more than I had this morning. Jake made tea and found some bread and cheese in the pantry. As Claire ate, color slowly returned to her cheeks, and he could see she was prettier than he had first realized. When she wasn't shivering with cold and fear, she had a gentle grace about her. Tell me about your ranch, she said, wrapping her hands around the warm teacup. We have about 300 acres, mostly cattle with some horses. It's good land and the house is solid. There's a garden plot that Sarah used to tend, but it's been empty for 3 years now. Maybe you'd like to plant something in the spring. I'd like that. I helped my mother with her garden when I was little. Claire paused. Jake, I should tell you more about why I left Chicago. The man my father owed money to. He said his son could do whatever he wanted with me once we were married. When I refused, he locked me in a room and said I'd stay there until I changed my mind. I climbed out a second-story window and walked to the train station with just the clothes on my back. Jake felt his hands clench into fists. What was this man's name? It doesn't matter now. I'm here and I'm safe. That's what matters. It matters to me. You're my wife now, Claire. That means if anyone tries to hurt you, they'll have to go through me first. Claire looked at him with surprise. You really mean that, don't you? I married you, didn't I? In my family, marriage means something. We protect each other no matter what. For the first time since he'd met her, Claire smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and more alive. "I think I'm going to like being married to you, Jake Morrison." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. "I think I'm going to like being married to you too, Claire Morrison." The storm raged outside for 3 more days, trapping them in the house together. By the time the snow stopped falling, they had talked through long nights by the fire, sharing stories of their childhood, their dreams, and their fears. Claire had a quick wit and a gentle sense of humor that made Jake laugh for the first time in years. She cooked meals that actually tasted good and mended his clothes with neat, careful stitches. Jake showed her around the ranch buildings, introduced her to the horses, and taught her how to milk the cow. She wasn't afraid of hard work and jumped in to help with everything, despite never having lived on a ranch before. On the 4th morning, Jake woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee and realized that the empty feeling in his chest was gone. The house felt alive again, filled with the sound of Claire humming as she worked in the kitchen. "Good morning, husband," she said with a smile when he came downstairs. "Good morning, wife," he replied and meant it. 6 months later, Claire was pregnant with their first child. She had transformed the house with curtains and flowers, filled the garden with vegetables, and won over every neighbor within 20 miles with her sweet nature and homemade pies. Jake found himself falling deeper in love with her every day. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her one evening as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset. "Marrying a stranger in a snowstorm?" Claire leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Never. Do you?" "Never," Jake said, kissing the top of her head. "That was the best decision I ever made." "Even though you didn't have a choice?" "I did have a choice. I could have put you on the next train back to Chicago. But something about you, sitting there in that station so brave and scared at the same time. I knew you belonged here." Claire looked up at him. "I love you, Jake Morrison." "I love you too, Claire Morrison. More than I ever thought possible." As the stars came out above their ranch, Jake reflected on how one snowy night had changed everything. He had gone to the train station expecting to meet a mail-order bride and instead found the other half of his soul. Sometimes the best things in life came when you least expected them, wrapped in a thin shawl and shivering in a train station, waiting for someone brave enough to offer shelter from the storm. Their first child was born the following spring, a healthy daughter they named Sarah after Jake's first wife. Claire insisted on the name, saying that Sarah had brought them together by making room in Jake's heart for new love. 2 years later came a son, then another daughter, and the empty ranch house overflowed with laughter and life. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they met, Jake and Claire would tell them about the blizzard, the midnight wedding, and the judge who married them in his nightgown. But mostly they would talk about taking chances on strangers, about the courage it takes to start over, and about how sometimes the most important decisions in life have to be made quickly, with faith instead of certainty. The train station in Cedar Creek still stands, and sometimes on snowy December nights, Pete's grandson swears he can still see the ghost of a shivering young woman sitting on the old wooden bench, waiting for her cowboy to take her home. But those who know the story say it's not a ghost at all, just love echoing through time, reminding everyone who passes by that sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with the courage to step into the unknown.